if I make a choice and I hit my partner, what is it within me that allowed me to get to that point, that I said it was okay in my mind to hit my partner?
Why do people use abuse? It's a question that anyone familiar with domestic violence has likely considered at some point. What is it that leads a person to hurt another person emotionally, physically, or in some other manner? Is there a perceived benefit to causing harm for them? Or is it just learned behavior? And how do we stop it? This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today we're speaking with
Mary Jane. I got hired on at JCNV, which stands for Jersey Center for Nonviolence, working with our clients in our ACT program and in our VISTA program, which are both the programs for people who are using abusive behaviors.
In this two-part episode, we delve into the decision to abuse another person and how abuse intervention programs work to keep victims and those who use abuse safer. You've been a counselor at the Jersey Center for Nonviolence, known, as you said, as JCNV, for several years now. So can you tell me a little bit more about JCNV and what kinds of programs we offer there?
Sure. So JCNV, Jersey Center for Nonviolence, we have 3 different programs that operate out of here. We have the ACT program, which stands for Abuse Ceases Today. The ACT program works with men who have been using abusive behaviors. The VISTA program works with women. And then Choices works with teens, ages 13 to 17. Most of our people are mandated. So we get people who are mandated from either court, probation, child protective services, but you don't have to be mandated. We do get people who come voluntarily that recognize that there is issues in their relationship and that they are perpetrating harm, and they don't want to do that anymore, right? They want to find a different way to behave.
I mean, it's really interesting because these programs initially were called batterers intervention programming, but we have, strayed away from that name. What do we refer to those programs as?
So they're abuse intervention programs, right?
Mhm.
We tend to look at the behavior, not the person as a whole, which that was the problem with calling it batterers intervention,
Mhm.
was then you're just labeling the whole person,
Mhm.
right? And if somebody takes that label and owns that label and recognizes, hey, this is me, I can't change that, right? That
Mhm.
becomes part of my identity. But if we say to them, look, you have some abusive behaviors that are not serving you to get you to where you want to be, well, I can change a behavior, right? And
Mhm.
so we really try to look at the whole person, what they need, and recognize that the abusive behaviors that they're choosing to use are just one small facet of this whole person, right?
Yeah.
So we'll work on changing these while also helping with the whole person. That's why we also do things like we have food donations here because a lot of people are struggling with food insecurities. We'll help you with finding services if you need drug and alcohol services, or you need mental health services, or even just some of our people haven't gone to the doctor in a long time, right?
Mhm.
Then we will, okay, how can we help you with that? How can we get you to a place where you're better all around, right?
Mhm.
Where you feel like you can succeed, right?
Why do you think that shift in language away from things like batterer or abuser is so important? And what would you say to somebody that thinks referring to somebody like that as a person who uses abuse is diluting the issue or making it seem like it's not as significant or bad?
We are, my dad always said to me growing up, we are all fragile human beings. We all have parts of us that we choose the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing, right? And so to just label somebody as a batterer basically says they're not worth saving.
Mhm.
And these are husbands, brothers, sisters, wives, moms, dads,
Right.
children, right? These are people who are going to go out and have multiple more relationships. They're
Mhm.
going to impact more people. And so to just say they are who they are and we're not going to change that, we're not only dooming them to a life where they're struggling and that they're hurting, but they're hurting other people. And so if we can say, okay, look, this is a whole person that has made bad choices, and help that person, then that's going to impact their kids, their new relationships, their old relationships, co-parenting situation if they have kids, right? It's going to impact relationships with their parents. I've seen people who have had horrible relationships with their parents, and by the end of the program, maybe the relationship isn't great, but they've set up some
Wow.
healthy boundaries and they're starting to talk to that person again,
Wow.
right? And it impacts everything. Work relationships improve, right? When you have domestic violence in a relationship, it's, yes, the victim is very much impacted, the person who's experienced the abuse, but also the person who's using the abuse, because on most levels, at some point, they recognize that this is not okay and what they're doing is not all right. And how can we help them?
Yeah, I think this brings us to like the heart of this conversation, which is really, I think, something anybody that works in domestic violence or knows somebody that's experiencing it has wondered. And that is really, why do people use abuse? Like, what is it that causes somebody to harm someone in their life, either physically, emotionally, or in some other way?
So there's a couple of different reasons that people use abusive behaviors. One, it's learned, right? We've learned, the person has learned through their experience and through what they've seen that this is how people handle relationship issues, right? So whether they saw it through their parents, which is a big, learning place for us of how do you behave in a relationship,
Right.
but they also could have learned it from grandparents, aunts and uncles, media. There are hardly any portrayals of healthy relationships in media, right? So
Yeah.
we're learning bad behaviors from all around us. And
Mm.
then over time, they learn that these behaviors work, right? So if I'm in an argument with my partner and I'm getting frustrated and angry and I just want that person to stop and I scream at them, they'll stop.
Mm.
It worked.
Wow.
So the next time they're saying something I don't like, I scream at them, they stop. It worked. But then over time, that no longer works anymore. So then I escalate, right? So I scream at them, they scream back at me, so I slap them. They stop. So we learn through reinforcement, just like anything that somebody learns, that these behaviors work and they serve a purpose until they don't work anymore. And then either we escalate or we realize what I'm doing is harmful.
How much do you think is somebody aware of that? Like, do you think that they're mimicking maybe their environment or what they saw growing up? Or how much are they consciously knowing, like, oh, this works for me, I'm going to keep abusing this person? Do you think there's a lot of self-reflection there, or?
I don't think there's a lot of self-awareness or self-reflection. I do think some people have it. We see people that come in and say, I never wanted to be like my parent,
Wow.
and yet here I am. Right. And so they're recognizing that they're repeating the behaviors that they saw in childhood and that they never wanted to have. And the problem is, and one of the first things that we go over this actually in orientation, which is the first thing that somebody comes into our program. They do intake and then they do orientation before they join a group. And in orientation, we go over that if we're repeating learned behaviors, what happens is, even if we say, I don't want to do this. Let's say I saw my father scream at my mother all growing up, and I kept saying, I will never do that. I will never do that. But then I get in a relationship and emotions get heightened and something happens and it triggers that behavior. Unless I know something else to do, I'm going to fall to the behavior that I know. Right. And so a lot of what we do in ACT and in VISTA and also in choices is we give options,
Wow.
right? Instead of doing this, this is what I could do, right? When I feel myself getting to this place, one of the things we talk about is timeouts, right? So first it's take a timeout. Then as we get better at recognizing our emotions, as we feel that anger building or that frustration building or that hurt building, how do I express that to my partner before it gets to that level that I
Right.
need to take the time out, right? So we kind of go through different steps, right? Like, let's do this first. Then once we get a little bit more control over ourselves and how to handle it, okay, now how do we express that to the person, right? What is my thinking about the situation? How is that impacting what I'm doing?
Wow.
And so those are the different things that we look at. But yeah, a lot of times people don't want to be doing these behaviors.
Yeah.
They recognize that it hurts.
That is really interesting, and I remember a therapist said to me once that we have like pathways in our brain that we go down, and when you're in a high stress situation or whatever, you immediately default to these pathways that have been
Yep.
really well established, and it's harder to kind of carve a new path through like really overgrown grass or something. But it brings me back to the point of children that witness domestic violence. I think you said they're way more likely to then start using those behaviors. And why exactly, like, do you think that they recognized that they were experiencing domestic violence as children? Or do you think that they, kind of in line with what we talked about before, aren't reflecting on that, or maybe aren't even aware that that is domestic violence?
I think a lot of people don't recognize it. They don't realize that it's domestic violence. They think it's normal. If you grow up and you see this is what your day to day is, to you, that is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you watch TV and you see relationships where the person is stalking somebody or telling them who they can see and what they can do. You're seeing that same behavior played out in media,
Normalized.
and it's normalized, right?
Wow.
Music that we listen to, it's normalized. This is what you do, right?
Mm.
Um, a Taylor Swift song just came into my head of, I carved my name into his car, right? Like,
Yes. Yep.
it's normalized as that's what you do in a breakup, right? He
Mm-hmm.
cheated on me, so I'm gonna go destroy his car.
Mm-hmm.
It's everywhere, it's all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's what you're experiencing at home, if you're not experiencing relationships where people talk through their differences and work things out and come together as a unit to go, okay, how are we going to handle this? Why wouldn't you think that that was normal?
I mean, I think that's a really fascinating point because I also feel when we're talking about domestic violence, people tend to have like an image in their head of somebody that they could say, "Oh, I know, this person would never ever do that to their family members or friends, but, I would get a bad energy or I could tell like if they're a bad person." But like working in the field that you have, do you feel like that is your experience of people who use abuse?
A lot of people that use abuse, if you asked anybody else, they're the nicest person on the planet. They would never do
Why?
this, right? And you just don't know what people are capable of in the privacy of their home, right? And what need we have for control,
Mm.
right? And there are benefits to control, right? Control means safety. Control means security, right? To a lot of people. And so to not have that control, there's this idea in our society, particularly where if I'm not the one in control, that means somebody else is in control of me,
Mm.
right? And so I need to, at least in my home, be the one that's in control, right? I
Wow.
have to have control over over somebody else. And what we really work on here is talking about the idea of control together, right?
Mhm.
How do the two people work together to have that sense of control, right?
Mm.
Where we're kind of lifting each other up. The
Mm.
other way that might make a little bit more sense that I always put it to my people is that I talk about the team idea, and that you want a partner who is a teammate, right? Your teammate, if you're on let's say you play basketball, right? Your teammate might have different skills than you. They
Mhm.
might be better at different things than you, right? But together,
Mhm.
your goal is to beat the other team.
Right.
Well, in a partnership, your partner might have different skills than you. I'm horrible with finances. My husband takes care of finances, right? Like I know that's not my skill, right? But I bring other skills to
Mhm.
the relationship. We work together as a team
Mm.
against whatever problem we're facing,
Right.
right? So how do you come together instead of being, I need to win, I need to win
Mm.
over my partner? How do I come together with my partner to win over this thing that we're facing, whether it's financial, whether it's how to raise children, whether it's, environmental, whatever it is, how do we work together as a team to face that? Right. And take out there's a big idea of like in arguments, I need to win.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
if you win, what does that make your partner?
A loser.
A loser. And do you really want your partner to feel like they're a loser?
Wow.
Yeah, so better team. How do
That's
we come
something my
together?
mom would always say. She would say, "Is it better to be right or to be loving in those
Yeah.
circumstances?" Because there is a power imbalance when you are trying to win or to have your point come across. And I wonder how quickly those kind of arguments can then escalate into more severe or maybe more physical types of abuse. And it's kind of interesting to me because that classic image of a person who uses abuse is that, they abuse their partner, and then they're really, really sorry, and they come back and they have flowers and they're very sweet and they're very kind. And I'm curious in general, what do you think about that display of remorse? Do you think that, and obviously we can't be sure of people's intentions, but do you think there is a genuine sense of being sorry and that it got out of control and they don't know how to handle it? Or is that another piece of the control kind of cycle of violence?
I think it depends on the person,
Mhm.
right? It depends on the situation. There are situations where I would say that's just another form of manipulation or control,
Right.
right? I need to keep you under my control,
Mhm.
right? And so to keep you happy and to keep you satisfied and to keep you here,
Mhm.
I'm going to apologize, right? Because, and again, that's something we talk about in here is what does an apology mean,
Ooh,
right?
interesting.
Because an apology without change is just words,
Mhm.
right? To say, if I hit my partner and I come to them and say, I'm sorry, but then 2 weeks later I hit them again,
Mhm.
my apology has no weight.
Right.
But if I make a choice and I hit my partner and I truly am sorry and I don't want to do that again, then I seek out support and help and change, right? What
Right.
is it within me that allowed me to get to that point
Mhm.
that I said it was okay in my mind to hit my partner? Because
Wow.
at some point I said it was okay. At some point I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. Even if it was split second, in my mind, I said that's okay. Right. And so apology without change, apology without action is just words. Right. And so it's a way of control. It's a way of keeping that person there. But also, there's the idea of the cycle of abuse. And we
Mhm.
go from an event, right? Then we go into the apology stage and the honeymoon stage, and then tension builds, and then we have an event. Not all abuse is like that. That really is just looking at the physical aspect of abuse
Oh, I didn't know that.
without looking at the day-to-day things that are going on in abusive relationships as well. So you have what I like to term as episodic things that happen, like
Mm.
um, hitting somebody, physical violence, sexual violence, even some really bad language violence, right? We're calling names and things like that. But then you also have an undercurrent of power and control that's going on in the relationship that's constant.
Mhm.
Things like the subtle put downs, right? the demanding different things, like dinner needs to be on the table at this time, I need to be served this, my needs need to be met at all times. The control over finances, right? That's an ongoing thing. If
Right.
somebody doesn't have access to the family finances, that's a day-to-day concern for that person,
Mhm.
right? How am I
Mhm.
going to put food on the table? How am I going to do different things? If I'm not allowed to speak to family members, or the person is controlling who I talk to or monitoring who I talk to, that's stuff that's going on all the time
Right.
and is more of kind of an undercurrent of control that's happening. So you do get this cycle, right, that happens, but then you also get this undercurrent that's going on at the same time. And we have to look at both aspects of it.
Right.
You can't just look at one, because sometimes those episodic things are never happening. You can have an abusive relationship that never gets to that level of physical violence,
Right.
right? But that can have this ongoing day to day put down, neglect, harm that's happening to the person that, you might not even really be aware of, and that the person might not even think of as abuse,
Yeah,
right?
and I wonder sometimes too if, physical violence, you can tell like something happened here. But
Yeah.
I also wonder how much too for people, let's say two different partners, one that's using abuse and one that's experiencing it, you know, if they're even able to tell what they're doing. Because like, for instance, the person using abuse might feel, well, I never hit them, so I'm not abusing them, like for instance my father did or my mother did or whoever, so I almost feel like, I wonder if they think, well, this is better, so I'm not, I couldn't possibly be abusive. And I'm curious, in that situation, in your experience, what have you had success in, like some of your participants, in getting through to them that behavior is abusive?
So especially when we're looking at that type of behavior, we really need to look at the thinking that's going on behind it,
Right.
right? Because a lot of times it's masked in the idea of, well, I'm just trying to help the person. I'm
Mhm.
just trying to protect them. Or they don't make the best decisions, right? So it's my job to help them.
Mhm.
Or they're not good with finances. They spend all of our money.
Yeah.
And so what we really talk about is, one, what is the thinking that I have behind that, right? Like what does it mean to me to be in this relationship with somebody who I think is inferior to me?
Wow.
Right? Because that's what it comes down to, is that I think that in some way I am better than this person. I know better than them. Right. And so we talk about, like, well, what does that mean for you? What does that do for you to be in a relationship with somebody that you think is less than in some way to you? Right. And then how is that then impacting what you are doing to them? Right?
Right.
Because what does our thinking then allow us to be able to do? Well, if I think the person is less than me, if I think this person is not as intelligent as me,
Mhm.
then yeah, I have the right to control where our money is spent because I know better than that. Right. So we really try to look at that. What is the thinking that I'm having about this other person? How is it benefiting me? And what is it allowing me to do? And what would happen if I changed that? What would happen if I went, okay, my partner knows what's best for them, and I trust my partner to make good decisions? How would that then impact my behavior towards them,
Does
right? And
that
my
frighten
overall
them a
relationships.
little bit, at the thought of losing that control? Because, it's something that I've heard before too, is like, oh, this is our responsibility. Like, I have to do this to make sure the family is in a good spot. But there's also, it's interesting to me that the need for the person using abuse is always elevated over the person that's experiencing it. It's like, well, this is what we need for the family, and I have decided that this is the need. And through group, what are the ways in which you're able to challenge that belief system? Like what is the framework or the groundwork that allows people to reflect? Because I'd imagine that's a pretty significant shift to their identity.
Yeah, and it can be a scary shift, right? So one of the main things that we try and do in the group is we really work on setting it up as a safe environment. You can talk about anything that's on your mind without judgment, without put down, right? We're gonna challenge you. We're gonna go, how's that working for you? Or, like, how is that impacting your children or your partner or you, right? Like, some of this, isn't that exhausting? To feel like
Yeah.
you have to control every aspect of every day, not just for yourself, but for the people in your life. Aren't you tired?
Wow.
Right? Because I don't know about you, but just controlling me, that's enough work for one day, right? Like, I'm good, you know.
Same. It's exhausting.
So, we talk about, like, what is that doing to you over time? Right? And how is that affecting the relationship? And what is that teaching, especially for people with children? What is that teaching your children?
Right.
Right? So if you are teaching your child that one person has to be in control of every aspect of the relationship, either that child is then going to go on to think that they need to be in control or that
Yeah.
they need to be controlled.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so that's typically how we can start to kind of get through to a lot of our people, and it's a work in progress. Can I say that when our people leave here, they're great and they're good and no problems? No.
Right.
Right? Like, you can't expect somebody to stop behaviors that they've been doing a whole lifetime
Right.
in 26 weeks.
Right.
But if we can get the wheels kind of turning and thinking of, maybe there is something different, maybe there is a different way to behave, maybe I should talk to my partner about what their wants are in the
Right.
relationship instead of just thinking about what mine are. That's a huge step
Yeah.
to get someone to acknowledge that I am accountable and I am responsible for my behavior, no matter what somebody else does to me,
Mhm.
is a huge step.
That's interesting because I feel like, as we talked a little earlier, society does normalize certain intense emotional reactions to certain stimulus, I would say, or events. And this is something that I've actually thought about a lot recently, is that we are always in control and responsible for our emotions and our reactions. But I think, if you say a situation to somebody and people might say, oh, well, he was doing that, she was doing that. And they're like, that makes a lot of sense that you like lost your temper, completely understand. But in this group, what's so amazing, and I'm a JC&V super fan, but that you really challenge these beliefs and get to the bottom of this in a space where they can maybe, that group environment that you talked about, that they can maybe reflect with other people who have used the same behaviors and maybe start to see like, wow, maybe this isn't exactly the result I want, or maybe it's more harmful than I even think it is. And I just am wondering, how have you seen abuse intervention programs like the ones at JC&V help people who have used abuse and maybe transform their behaviors or start to transform their behaviors?
I've seen people that, this is going to sound kind of strange, but there's nothing like being in a group and hearing somebody for the first time admit, I strangled my partner.
Right.
I chose that. I did that. And it was not their fault.
Wow.
I did that. Right. And it's so heartbreaking, but also kind of liberating. A lot of people at the end of that say, I feel better getting this off my chest because now I can move forward from this. Now I can go, okay, I did this. How do I not do it again?
Wow.
Right. And now, not everybody has that major of a breakthrough, but
Right.
when you do have that, not only does that impact that person, right, to realize, okay, I did this thing, and to take accountability for it, and what am I going to do in the future to prevent it from happening again? but also the impact that it has on the people in the room. Because now they've gotten to know this other person, right? They see them as the nice person, the good guy. I say
Yeah.
guy a lot because most of my clients are men,
Yeah.
but I've seen it in the women's group too, right? And then to kind of go, okay, well, if that person was capable of doing it, what am I capable of doing as well?
Wow.
Right? And how am I going to make that change to
Mhm.
not do that, to not get to that point, right? Do they make bad choices again? Yeah, some of them do.
Right.
And some of them we've had the same client number of times that come through our program. But each time we see a little bit of change. We
Right.
see a little bit more accountability, a little bit more, I messed up. I made a bad choice. I did what I should not have done, right? Steps in the right direction,
Mhm.
baby steps. Right?
Yeah.
Or catching it. We've had people come back after finishing the program and going, okay, I'm starting to fall down that same, like starting to recognize the path that they take, right?
Wow.
Recognize I'm starting to fall down that path again. I need to come to alumni, or I need to come back to the program. And so they do. So we see little steps, we see improvements in behavior, even just how they talk to each other and how they engage in group. Right, that will improve over time. More self-belief in, it's always great when someone comes in and is like, I took a time out this week and I didn't do these things.
That's
Right,
great.
I didn't call my partner a name, or I didn't start slamming things, or I didn't punch a hole in the wall. I took a time out and I left. Right, and I went for a walk and I calmed down and I came back and I talked about the problem and we reached an agreement.
Such power in that. Wow.
There's so much power in that, and it feels good.
Yeah.
Right? It feels good for them. They come in proud of,
Mhm.
yeah, I made a good choice today.
Yeah.
I made the right choice, or I hear a lot, I heard Mary Jane's voice in my head.
I
Like, all
love
right, I'll
that.
be that voice.
Man.
But
But that's the power of accountability. I mean,
yeah,
for a person to stand up and acknowledge, obviously, it's not condoning the behavior, but acknowledging, like, I did this and I don't want to do it again, and the ripple effects that has. Because I feel like a lot of times, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people who've used abuse maybe deny, minimize, blame. They won't say, this behavior is because of me and I chose to do it. It's more so, well, he or she or they were doing this to upset me and it drove me to this point. So to sit there in front of everybody and be like, I did this because I got to this point because of me. Like, I can't even imagine the shift in your mindset of getting to that point. And it might not be perfect, but it's a lot better
yeah.
of a start to be in that place of reflection instead of denial.
It's the biggest step that we need them to take a lot of the times. It's just that step to, instead of blaming, instead of putting it off on other people, I did this, I made this choice, right? Because, we talk a lot about emotions as well in the group, and how to label emotions, how to understand them, how to recognize them. So a lot of times people don't want to face those hard emotions, whether
Right.
it's hurt, abandonment, sadness,
Mhm.
even anger, right? We don't want to face it. Those cause problems. Those emotions cause problems. And so I'm not gonna look at
They
those
don't
emotions. I'm gonna
exist.
ignore. They don't exist. The problem is when we go, they don't exist, they don't exist, they don't exist, they come up,
Wow.
right? And so a lot of times we talk about, like, you need to recognize the emotion.
Mhm.
Anger in itself is not bad.
Right, right,
Anger is just an emotion. It's what we do with the anger that's bad. Sadness in itself is not bad. It doesn't harm us.
right.
It's actually good. It
Mhm.
helps us move forward and to reflect on the good and move forward into the new, right? Um, all of those emotions serve a purpose. And so part of it is feeling safe enough to acknowledge those emotions.
It is no secret that I love the work we do at the Jersey Center for Nonviolence. Mary Jane is an incredible guest, and I'm so thankful we got to have this conversation. If you'd like to hear part 2 of this episode, where we talk more about emotions, accountability, and the isolation of abuse, come back next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.